You ever meet two people who should have been enemies, yet somehow became the one thing keeping each other alive? For 11 years, Claire held a broken town together with nothing but grit and compassion. Then came Daniel, the billionaire boss who measured lives in margins and dollars. She swore he was heartless. He swore she was impossible. And maybe they were both right. Until the night pressure, pain, and one reckless decision collided on a frozen rooftop. A kiss. Not romantic, not heroic. A crack in the armor of two people who'd forgotten how to breathe. What neither of them knew was this: that single kiss would become the fault line that split their old lives apart and forced them to choose who they truly wanted to be. Stay with me, because this story doesn't begin with love. It begins with a breaking point. And what comes after might just change everything. The elevator groaned the way it always did at 7 in the morning, long, tired, like it had carried too many years on its back. Claire Whitman stepped out with a paper cup of cheap hospital coffee, steam curling up into the December air. Her shoulders were already tight, drawn in as if bracing for a blow she hadn't seen yet. After 11 years at Riverside Regional Hospital, she'd learned to read the weather of the place before she even reached her desk. The hallway lights flickered, buzzing softly, casting jittery shadows over the worn linoleum tiles. She had walked this same path thousands of times, past the same pale bulletin board, the same poster about flu season, the same smell of disinfectant lingering like a memory you couldn't quite shake. Nothing ever changed here, except the people who desperately needed it not to. She reached her small office, dropped her bag on the chair, and sat down with a sigh that came from somewhere far deeper than her lungs. She turned on her computer, prepared for the usual morning flood of emails, referrals, scheduling requests, maybe a plea for emergency transport for a patient who had no insurance. But the subject line at the top of her inbox froze her breath in her throat. Confidential, Community Clinic Consolidation Plan. For a moment, she didn't move. The cursor blinked at her like a warning. Then she clicked. A memo filled the screen, clinical, cold, with words that punched harder than anything she'd felt in years. The free community clinic on the east side, the one she had fought to keep funded, the one she had built outreach programs for, the one she had poured weekends and holidays and pieces of herself into, would be shut down in 60 days. 60 days. After that, patients would be directed to a facility 25 miles away, a 40-minute drive longer in winter, impossible for many. Her chest tightened, images rose unbidden. Mr. Dawson, the Vietnam vet with one lung who came in every Tuesday, rain or shine. The single mother who walked nearly 2 miles in the snow because her car had died years ago. The kids, the ones who bounced through the clinic doors calling, "Miss Claire," sometimes the only stable adult they saw all week. She felt heat prick behind her eyes, sharp and humiliating. Crying at work was something she'd sworn she wouldn't do again. Not after the last restructuring, not after the layoffs. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled. The justification was written in carefully sanitized corporate language about financial sustainability and optimizing care delivery. Not once did the memo mention people. Not once did it acknowledge that the clinic was the only lifeline in a part of town the rest of the region preferred to forget. A dull ringing filled her ears. She set her coffee down and pressed her fingers into her eyelids, willing herself to breathe. She had known the hospital was in trouble financially. She had known the board was restless. But she had believed naively, maybe stubbornly, that some things were worth fighting for. Then her phone buzzed. A text message lit up the screen. From Daniel Hayes. "My office. Now." Her stomach dropped. Of course it was him. Daniel Hayes, the new CEO from Columbus, brought in 6 months ago with a reputation for turning around failing institutions, which, in Claire's experience, usually meant cutting anything that didn't produce immediate revenue. He was the kind of man who could fold entire neighborhoods into a spreadsheet and call it efficiency. To her, he was the man who had turned her clinic into a liability. She stared at the message, jaw clenched so hard it ached. He hadn't even given her the courtesy of a meeting invitation, just a command, sent without a hint of humanity. She glanced back at the memo. The words blurred, then refocused like they were daring her to react. Her breath trembled on the way out. Then something steadier came in. She pushed back her chair, stood up, and printed the memo. The machine hummed slowly, spitting out each cold page. When it was done, she grabbed the stack, folded it once, and clenched it in her fist until the paper crumpled. It felt good, solid, like gripping a truth she refused to let slip away. She took one long breath, filling her lungs until her heartbeat leveled itself. Then she stepped into the hallway and began the walk toward the CEO's office. Past the old elevator, past the flickering lights, past the place where the smell of disinfectant always hit the hardest. She walked with a single thought burning steady in her chest. If he wants to close my clinic, he'll have to say it to my face. The closer Claire got to the executive wing, the quieter the hospital became. On the third floor, where her little office lived, there were always sounds, phones ringing, nurses laughing darkly at something only they understood, someone pushing a cart down the hallway. Up here, the air felt padded, softer carpet, fewer footsteps, a framed, abstract painting on the wall that probably cost more than the clinic's entire blood pressure monitor budget. Daniel's office sat at the end of the corridor, all glass and sharp lines, like something from a magazine. She could see the back of him through the transparent wall, tall, in a navy suit, shoulders held so straight they looked almost painful. 3 monitors glowed in front of him, awash with charts and numbers, casting blue light up along his jaw. He didn't look up when she approached. Of course he didn't. She stopped just outside the glass, took one more steadying breath, then pushed the door open. "Miss Whitman," he said, without lifting his eyes from the screen, "close the door, please." His voice was deeper than she expected, calm, almost bored. She shut the door behind her, the soft click sounding louder than it should have. She stood there a moment, waiting. The memo was still crushed in her hand, edges digging into her palm. Daniel finished typing something, fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. Only when he had hit enter did he lean back slightly and glance at her. Up close, he was every inch the executive the board had wanted. Mid-40s, maybe a little older, neat gray threads at his temples that made him look distinguished rather than worn. His white shirt was crisp, sleeves rolled to his forearms, but there was nothing casual in the way he held himself. It was as if his spine had been set in place long ago and never allowed to relax. His eyes, a cool steel blue, flicked to the crumpled papers in her hand. "So," he said, "you've seen the memo." She heard the faintest lilt of annoyance, as if she'd read something before he had a chance to spin it. "I have," Claire answered. "I'd say thank you for the heads up, but that would require there having been one." A muscle tightened along his jaw. "I was going to call you up after my 8 o'clock call with the board." "Lucky me," she said. "I beat you to it." He took in a breath through his nose, let it out slowly, and folded his hands on the desk. The desk itself was spotless. No stray pens, no sticky notes, no photographs, just a laptop, a leather notepad, and a small, tasteful plant that looked like it had never known dust. "Sit down, Miss Whitman." "No, thank you. Standing is fine." One of his eyebrows lifted, just barely. "All right then, let's not waste time. The East Side Clinic is being consolidated. We're bleeding money out of that building, and the hospital cannot sustain it." There it was. No preamble, no apology, just a sentence delivered like a diagnosis. "We're not bleeding money," Claire said. "We're helping people who don't have anywhere else to go." He glanced at one of the monitors, then back at her. "We're losing an average of $230,000 a year on that site alone. That's not help, Miss Whitman, that's a hemorrhage. Those are people, not numbers on a screen." He tapped a key and spun one of the monitors slightly so she could see. Graphs, lines, and bar charts spilled across it, red and blue and gray. "This," he said, "is reimbursement by payer type. Commercial insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, self-pay. You see these?" He pointed at the smallest sliver. "That's self-pay and charity. The majority of your clinic's volume. They bring in almost nothing." "And what do you think happens to them when you shut the doors?" Claire shot back. "They don't suddenly grow employer insurance. They get sicker. They end up in the ER. They die alone in their apartments because no one catches their blood pressure at 180 over 110. "Stories," he said, his tone flattening. "Stories don't pay the electric bill." For a second, she thought she might actually step around the desk and shake him. Instead, she took a slow breath, feeling her fingers tighten around the memo. "Those stories are why this hospital exists," she said quietly. "Unless we've changed our motto to Riverside Regional, where we only treat the profitable." A flicker crossed his face, annoyance, maybe, or something sharper. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You've been here, 11 years? He asked. She frowned. 12, in March. He nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. Bachelor's in social work, master's in public health. Led 3 successful grant applications for the clinic. Built the mobile flu shot program during the pandemic. You speak at churches and Rotary clubs. People write letters about you. Her stomach twisted, thrown off balance. How do you? He reached for a folder on his desk and flipped it open, pulling out a single sheet. Her name was at the top. I like to know who my key players are, he said, and where my biggest challenges lie. Challenges, she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. His eyes skimmed the page as he continued, as if reading a report out loud. You haven't taken a full 2-week vacation since you started. You're often on site on Saturdays. You're on a first-name basis with more than half of the East Side patients. She felt suddenly exposed, like someone had opened a door she hadn't given permission to touch. You're our most valuable PR asset in that neighborhood, he concluded, which is why I need you. That last line landed like a slap. PR asset. Not advocate, not leader, asset. So that's what this is, she said. You didn't call me up here to talk. You called me up here to use me. I called you up here, he replied evenly, because the board wants a soft landing for this consolidation, and you're the only person with enough credibility to keep the community from burning the place down. He pushed the folder aside and slid a fresh sheet of paper toward her. It was blank, except for a header. Community Transition Communication Plan. I want you to lead the messaging, he said. Town halls, press releases, op-eds, patient stories reframed as transition success. You speak their language, they trust you. And you think I'm going to stand up in front of them and tell them this is good news, Claire said slowly. That somehow losing their only clinic is a transition. In return, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken, I'll guarantee your position here for at least a year, regardless of other restructuring, and I'll seriously consider your proposal for a smaller mobile unit on the East Side. 2 evenings a week, maybe Saturdays. It won't match the current footprint, but it's something. Her heart lurched. There it was, the hook buried inside the blade. Her job, her paycheck, her mother's nursing home bill that was due at the end of the month, the mortgage on the small, tired house she could barely afford to heat. Anger flared up so hot she could taste it, metallic and sharp. He was turning her life's work into damage control, using the trust she had earned inch by inch to sell a decision she did not believe in. Yet, beneath the anger, another feeling crept in, unwelcome and disorienting. He looked tired. Up close, the neat gray at his temples was threaded deeper than his age alone would explain. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that didn't come from laughter. And every few minutes, when he thought she wasn't looking, his right hand drifted to his chest, just resting there, fingers splayed as if steadying something inside. This wasn't some cartoon villain, rubbing his hands together as he plotted. This was a man who had been handed a sinking ship and told to make it float without changing the laws of physics. I'm not your puppet, Claire said. Her voice was quieter now, but steadier. I won't stand up and lie to people I've spent a decade asking to trust us. I'm not asking you to lie, he said. I'm asking you to help them see the bigger picture. The bigger picture where they're left behind. He exhaled, a rough sound that surprised them both. For a moment, the mask slipped just enough for her to glimpse something raw underneath. I don't like this any more than you do, he said. But if we lose this hospital altogether, East Side, West Side, all of it goes dark. You know that. Silence stretched between them, heavy as lead. She thought of her mother's face, slack in sleep at the nursing home. Thought of Mr. Dawson wheezing as he joked with the receptionist. Thought of the kids drawing crayon rainbows on paper while their mothers waited for lab results. Her throat ached. If I do this, she said finally, it's on my terms. His gaze sharpened. What terms? I get access to every financial report tied to this closure, line by line, no surprises. He hesitated. Those are internal documents. And I'm internal, she said. If you want my face on your stage, I see the whole script. His jaw worked. He nodded once. Anything else? He asked. Yes, Claire said. You come with me. Every town hall, every meeting. No hiding behind a memo and my name on a flyer. If they're going to yell, they yell at both of us. This time, the pause was longer. She watched him weigh something invisible behind his eyes. Time, risk, pride. He nodded, slowly. You'll regret that, Miss Whitman, he said. The faintest ghost of a weary smile touched his mouth. People can be unkind. I already do, she replied. But as she turned to leave his glass office, memo still crushed in her hand, she felt something else flicker under the frustration, the fragile thread of curiosity about the man who had just agreed to stand in the fire with her, and what it might cost them both. The church basement smelled like burnt coffee and winter coats that had never fully dried. Claire had stood in this room dozens of times over the past decade, food drives, flu shot clinics, Thanksgiving baskets. She knew every crack in the concrete floor, every faded hymn number still tacked on the corkboard near the piano. But tonight felt different. Tonight, people weren't gathered for help. They were gathered for answers. Rows of metal folding chairs filled the room, each occupied by someone whose life would be touched by the clinic's closure. A potluck table sat against the wall, styrofoam cups, lukewarm coffee in a dented silver urn, and a plate of cookies no one was touching because anger leaves no room for appetite. Daniel stood near the front, towering over the flimsy lectern in his tailored charcoal coat. The coat alone cost more than most people in this room made in a week. Every detail of him, his polished shoes, the neat collar, the thinning patience in his eyes, looked painfully out of place here. Claire felt the stares before she heard the words. There he is, someone muttered. The man who wants to shut us down. When Daniel stepped to the lectern, the entire room shifted. Folding chairs creaked as people leaned forward, bracing themselves. A retired steelworker, broad shoulders stooped with age, jabbed a finger toward him. I've been coming to that clinic since my plant closed in 2008, the man barked. Doc Sullivan's the only one who'll see me without insurance. What the hell am I supposed to do now? A grandmother with silver hair pulled tight into a bun slammed her cane on the floor hard enough to echo. My grandson gets asthma attacks every winter. We can't be driving 25 miles on black ice for an inhaler. Murmurs swelled, faces flushed. Someone pointed at Daniel like he was a villain on the evening news. Claire stood beside him, gripping her notes, though she knew she wouldn't need them. Daniel cleared his throat, lifted his chin, and began. I understand your concerns, he said in the careful, practiced cadence of someone who had been trained to stay composed. But Riverside Regional is facing a significant operating deficit. We have to consider the operating margin, the payer mix. The room instantly chilled. Payer mix? Someone scoffed. Speak English. Heartless suit. A man in the back shouted, You ever been to the east side, Mr. CEO? Or is that too far from your spreadsheets? Daniel's eyes tightened almost imperceptibly, but he pressed on, mistakenly convinced data would calm the storm. The reimbursement rates for Medicaid and self-pay are unsustainable. The hospital cannot maintain. You can't maintain our neighborhood, the grandmother snapped, cane striking the floor again. Claire felt heat rising in her chest. She had seen community members angry before, but this was fury built from years of feeling ignored, and Daniel, he had no idea how to speak their language. He kept going, voice steady but cold. The hospital must prioritize the services that benefit the majority of. That did it. Claire couldn't take another word. She stepped forward, held out her hand, and gently pulled the microphone from him. Daniel blinked at her, surprised, but didn't stop her. She faced the crowd. Look, she said, voice firm but warm. I know you're scared. I am too. I've worked at that clinic for 11 years. I've held your hands in exam rooms. I've sat with you at lab results. I know exactly who gets hurt when a place like that shuts down. The room quieted by degrees. She paced slowly, grounding herself as much as them. But the truth is, rural healthcare is collapsing everywhere. Not because we want it to, because insurance won't pay for what it actually costs to care for people. You all know this. Half of you here have gotten bills you couldn't make sense of. A few nods, a sigh, a softening. But Daniel isn't here because he wants to cut everything. He's here because the hospital is drowning. And I'm not saying that makes this easier. It doesn't. But we can't yell our way out of a national crisis. She didn't defend the closure, but she translated his cold data into the language of real life. And she did something she never imagined she would. She protected him. Not from accountability, he deserved plenty of that, but from being turned into a caricature. She caught his eyes for half a second. Something shifted there, something like recognition or gratitude he didn't know how to express. He stepped back as she continued, letting her lead. When the meeting ended, people still looked angry but less lost. Some even approached Claire to ask questions. A few others glared at Daniel, but no one pointed fingers anymore. He stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, hands clasped, absorbing every word, every wound. When the last of the folding chairs scraped back into place, they stepped out into the parking lot. A single streetlight flickered overhead, buzzing like it wanted to give up. Snow drifted sideways in the wind. "You went off script," Daniel said, voice flat but tense. Claire rounded on him. "You have no idea what it's like to look these people in the eye and tell them services are being cut. No idea. You stand behind numbers and talk about margins. They hear that and think you don't see them at all." I was trying to explain. "You were talking at them, Daniel. Not to them." His jaw tightened. "We agreed on a plan." "No," Claire said, stepping closer, the cold burning her cheeks. "You handed me a plan and expected me to parrot it like a press release. Tonight wasn't about PR, it was about people who are scared and sick and tired of being told budgets matter more than their lives." The wind gusted, sharp as a blade. Snowflakes clung to the fabric of his coat. He opened his mouth to retort, but then he stopped. His hand almost subconsciously rose to his chest. He pressed his palm there, fingers splayed. His breath hitched. He leaned slightly against his car, eyes squeezing shut. It lasted just a moment, but long enough. Long enough for Claire's anger to flicker into something else. Concern. Fear. A quiet, unwelcome question blooming in her gut. Is he just stressed, or is something actually wrong with him? The streetlight buzzed overhead, dimming for a heartbeat, and the cold night seemed to hold its breath with her. The hospital after 10 p.m. felt like a different world. Quieter, heavier, as if the whole building were drifting in slow motion through the snowstorm outside. Half the lights were off to save power. Only a few dim overhead fixtures hummed softly in the administrative wing, casting pale cones of light over empty desks. Claire rubbed her hands together for warmth as she walked down the hallway, boots clicking in the hushed silence. The storm had blown in harder than expected, and she didn't trust her old car on icy roads. So she stayed, finished paperwork, made calls, tried to find ways to stretch resources that were already stretched beyond breaking. Across the corridor, Daniel's office glowed. Of course he was still here. The man probably lived in this building. She stared at the faint light under his door for a long moment, then sighed and headed toward the break room. The coffee in the pot was burnt and bitter, the kind that tasted like regret and stainless steel. She poured 2 cups anyway. When she stepped into his doorway, Daniel was hunched over his laptop, tie gone, shirt sleeves rolled up. A single desk lamp lit the room, making the shadows pool behind him. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass, illuminated by a street lamp like falling ash. "You're still here," Claire said quietly. He didn't look up. "So are you." She hesitated, then held out the paper cup. "Peace offering or punishment. Depends how you feel about break room coffee." He glanced up and surprised her. He smiled. Not the polite, thin version she'd seen before, a real one, small, tired, but honest. It softened him in ways she didn't expect. "I'll take it," he said, accepting the cup. "Though I reserve the right to complain later if it kills me." "Fair enough." She sat across from him, unfolding the reports she'd been studying earlier. The desk between them was littered with diagrams, charts, projected expenses. Except now, in the quiet of the snowstorm, the numbers felt less like weapons and more like puzzles neither of them knew how to solve. For the next hour, they worked side by side. She pointed out details he'd glossed over: patient names, stories, tiny notations nurses scribbled in margins. She flipped her phone around to show him photos pinned on the clinic's bulletin board. Kids holding stickers, a veteran smiling with his therapy dog, a mother beaming after her blood pressure finally stabilized. Daniel stared at those images longer than she expected. A crease formed between his brows, not annoyance this time, but something closer to ache. "I've never seen those," he murmured. "You never asked," she replied gently. He didn't defend himself. That alone felt like a crack in the armor. By midnight, exhaustion draped over both of them. She gathered her things, wrapped her scarf around her neck, and stepped into the hallway only to realize, halfway down, that she'd left the scarf draped over the chair during their earlier meeting. She muttered under her breath, pivoted, and walked back. As she reached his office again, voices leaked through the door. Daniel wasn't talking to himself. She paused, hand on the doorknob, instinct urging her to turn away, but the tone in his voice made her freeze. He sounded cornered. "Bob, I'm telling you, I'm fine," he said sharply. "The episode last week was just stress." Another voice came through speakerphone, older, calm, unmistakably medical. "Daniel, your stress test wasn't good. Your arrhythmia is worsening. You keep pushing 16-hour days, and you're asking for a heart attack." Claire's breath caught. A cold tremor went through her, not because she felt pity, not exactly, but because she finally understood. The hand on his chest, the tightness in his jaw, the long pauses when he thought no one noticed. He wasn't just running the hospital into the ground. He was running himself there with it. "And for God's sake," the cardiologist continued, "you need to tell someone, a spouse, a sibling, anyone. You can't keep pretending." "I don't have anyone," Daniel snapped. "Just fix the numbers, and I'll handle the rest." Fix the numbers. Even now, Claire didn't mean to push open the door, but when her hand moved, the hinges gave her away. Daniel turned instantly. He went white. "How long were you standing there?" he demanded. Long enough, she thought. Long enough to understand something she wasn't meant to know. "I came back for my scarf," she said, lifting it slightly. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop." His expression hardened. "It doesn't matter. It's a private medical discussion." "That concerned the man running a hospital," she shot back. "A hospital whose decisions affect thousands of people. Do not twist this." "Twist?" She stepped forward, heat rising in her voice. "You're telling entire neighborhoods to adapt while you're silently falling apart." His eyes flashed with something volatile, anger, shame, fear, all tangled together. "This is none of your business." She pointed at his chest, where his hand had been pressed earlier. "If you drop dead on a boardroom table, your precious margins won't save you." His breath hitched, not in pain this time, but in something closer to a crack. She saw it, saw him swallow hard, saw the wall wobble. "You don't understand," he said softly. "My father ran this hospital for 33 years. He died in our own ER waiting room, 56 years old. Chest pain dismissed as work exhaustion. The board didn't care then, either. Performance was all that mattered." Claire felt the air shift. He wasn't talking to her anymore. He was talking to a ghost. "My whole life," Daniel continued, "I've been told to fix what he couldn't, to be the son who keeps the place alive. Doesn't matter if it kills me in the process." Snow tapped against the glass like faint applause. Claire didn't speak, didn't move. Something unspoken passed between them. Two people who had been carrying burdens alone for far too long, suddenly sharing the same harsh fluorescent light. He rubbed his temples and sank into the chair. She sat across from him, neither reaching for nor retreating from the moment. Just silence. A tired, fragile silence between two exhausted souls who had finally stopped pretending they were made of steel. Outside, the storm kept falling. But inside, something warmer flickered, uneasy, uninvited, unmistakable. By the time Friday arrived, the pressure felt like a vice, tightening around the entire hospital. Reporters had begun calling the front desk, asking about rumors of community unrest. The board sent Daniel 3 increasingly frantic emails a day, warning him to control the narrative before donors get spooked. And Claire, poor Claire, couldn't even escape it at home. Someone had left a nasty voicemail calling her a traitor. Another person told her she should be ashamed. That morning, as she walked out to her car, she found her back tire slashed clean through. She stood over it in the freezing air, boots crunching on the ice, breath puffing out in small clouds. For a moment, she simply let herself sag forward, hands on her knees, fighting the overwhelming urge to cry. But work didn't care about her feelings. The board didn't. The community didn't. And Daniel, well, she didn't know what he cared about anymore. The second town hall that evening was even more crowded than the first. People packed into the cafeteria of the closed elementary school, folding chairs shoulder to shoulder, jackets pulled tight, tempers simmering. Claire tried to steady her voice as she opened the meeting. She tried to explain the transition plans again, tried to remind them she wasn't the enemy, but tonight, they weren't listening. A woman in her 50s stood abruptly, her voice sharp enough to cut the air. Her eyes locked on Claire like a blade. "Tell me," the woman demanded, "how much is he paying you to sell us out?" The crowd murmured a ripple of distrust, accusation, betrayal. Claire felt her throat close. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words got stuck halfway. Before she could recover, Daniel stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was steady but low. Enough, he said. The crowd quieted in surprise. He looked directly at the woman, and then at everyone else in the room. I've made mistakes, Daniel said slowly. I've made a lot of them. We all have. But don't take your anger out on her. This is on me. Claire's eyes snapped toward him. The room seemed to hold its breath. Daniel took in the sea of faces, hurt, worried, furious. If you want to yell at someone, yell at me, he said. Not Claire. She's been trying to save this clinic for years. I'm the one who couldn't. Silence. A heavy, stunned silence. Claire felt something twist painfully in her chest. Gratitude and anger, and something softer she refused to name. After the meeting, she didn't wait for him. She walked fast, practically storming into the stairwell. The door swung open hard, echoing off the concrete. He caught up to her at the landing. Claire. She whirled on him. You let them tear me apart for weeks, she hissed. And now you decide to grow a conscience? He recoiled, as if struck. That's not fair. Oh, isn't it? She jabbed a finger toward him, fury sharp and shaking. Where was that speech 2 weeks ago? Daniel? Where was it when they called me a liar? When someone slashed my tire? When every voicemail I get is another accusation? He ran a hand through his hair, eyes tight. You think this is easy for me? The board wants my head on a spike. The community wants the same. I'm trying to keep us afloat. You're hiding, she snapped. Behind spreadsheets, behind me, behind your damn guilt. Guilt? His voice cracked for the first time. You think I don't feel that every single day? The stairwell felt too small, suddenly 2 people standing too close, grief and stress bouncing off the concrete walls. Let's go somewhere else, he said quietly. They climbed the last flight, pushed through the heavy door, and stepped onto the roof. The winter wind hit them instantly sharp, whipping at their coats. The city spread below in a shimmer of lights, the hospital's HVAC units humming like distant engines on a ship. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. Daniel stuffed his hands into his pockets, staring out at the dark skyline. You're accusing me of hiding, he said finally. But you're so sure you're right about everything, that you can't see what I'm trying to do. Oh please, she muttered. Spare me. He turned, frustration simmering. Do you know what it's like to be responsible for everyone here? To know every decision might cost a life, maybe hundreds if I make the wrong call? I can't afford to think with my heart the way you do. And I can't afford not to, she shot back. Someone has to remember, these people aren't balance sheets. Wind whipped her hair across her cheeks. Her breath trembled. You're a coward, Daniel, she whispered. You let fear of the board define every choice you make. Something in him snapped. He stepped closer, not aggressive, not angry, but wounded in a way that shook her. You drive me insane, Claire, he said softly, voice raw. Because you're the only one who still believes this place can be more than a business. And he swallowed hard. I don't know how to be the man you want me to be. She froze. He looked at her like the confession itself broke something open inside him. Claire turned away, blinking fast, cold wind stinging her eyes. She didn't want him to see her shaking, not from fury now, but from the overwhelming weight of everything between them. Snowflakes drifted around them, catching in the glow of the rooftop lights. She felt him move behind her, felt the warmth of him, even through the cold. His hand lifted, hovering near her shoulder. He hesitated, almost pulled back, but then something slipped past his restraint. He stepped closer. His hands came up tentative at first, then firmer as he cupped her face, turning her toward him. Daniel, he kissed her. It wasn't smooth or graceful. It wasn't even planned. It was raw, desperate, months of fear and frustration and longing crashing together. Her breath hitched, knees weakening as she gripped his coat, pulling him closer without thinking. Snow swirled around them. The city stretched out below. His thumb brushed her cheek, gentle where everything else between them had been violent. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, foreheads nearly touching. The world felt rearranged. Claire's voice trembled as she whispered, You can't fix this with a kiss, Daniel. He held her gaze, voice low, unsteady. I know, he murmured, but it turns out, you're the one thing I'm not willing to lose. The wind howled across the rooftop, carrying their breath into the cold night, 2 people standing at the edge of something dangerous, and neither sure what it meant, but both knowing nothing would be the same now. For 3 days, Claire moved through the hospital like someone trying not to disturb a sleeping animal. No matter where she went, past the nurse's station, through the clinic hallway, into morning briefings, she felt it. The kiss. It lingered in the air like static, like the moment before lightning hits. Every time she caught a glimpse of Daniel down the hallway, usually stiff-backed, usually focused, her stomach tightened with a mix of dread and something softer she couldn't name. Neither spoke of that night on the roof. They didn't need to. The silence itself was loud enough. In the conference room on Tuesday, Daniel entered last, carrying a stack of reports. The board liaison droned on about budget adjustments, but Claire barely heard a word. She was too aware of Daniel's presence, standing, hesitating, then choosing the seat next to her instead of his usual spot across the table. She tried not to react. She failed. His sleeve brushed her arm. She felt it like a spark. As the meeting dragged on, Daniel did something else different. He turned to her. "Claire," he said, voice steady but quieter than usual, "what's your view?" He never asked her first, not once, in all the months she'd worked with him. Their colleagues glanced between them, puzzled. Claire found her voice. "We can adjust the outreach model, but only if transportation vouchers are included." Daniel nodded immediately. "Then that's what we'll do." Afterward, as people gathered their laptops, she caught him rubbing his chest again, more lightly this time. But then she noticed something new, an appointment card peeking out of his planner. Cardiology. Thursday, 4:15 p.m. A small, unexpected flicker warmed her chest. He was actually taking care of himself. She left the room before she could think about what that meant. By Wednesday night, the snow had settled into soft drifts outside the cafeteria windows. The dinner rush was long gone. The room sat mostly dark, with only the humming soda machine and the glow of vending lights for company. Claire had stayed late again, reviewing spreadsheets the finance team had sent her. When she stepped into the cafeteria to grab tea, she found Daniel already there alone, sitting at a corner table with a sandwich he clearly wasn't eating. He looked up as she approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She poured hot water into her cup, the steam curling upward between them like a fragile veil. "You avoiding me?" Daniel finally asked, his attempt at casualness landing somewhere closer to vulnerable. "No," Claire said quietly. "Are you avoiding me?" He huffed a breath, half a laugh, half something tired. "I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore." She sat across from him without meaning to, her hands curled around her cup for warmth. Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes studying the table instead of her. "I hadn't planned on." He paused, searching for words. "On falling for someone who challenges me every time I open my mouth." Her chest tightened. "Daniel, you push me," he said, still not looking at her. "Not out of spite, out of conviction. It's infuriating. And," he swallowed, "it's also the first honest thing I've had in a long time." Claire stared at her tea, unable to steady her pulse. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to want something that scares me." He lifted his eyes slowly. "What scares you?" "You," she whispered. "Us. The imbalance between us, and the fact that I've been with men who chose work over everything else. I promised myself I'd never walk that road again." Daniel's expression shifted, subtle, but full of regret. "I'm not proud of how I've lived," he said softly. "But I've been trying to change things, even before the roof, especially before." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated long enough for her breath to stall in her throat. 2 months ago," he began, "I contacted a non-profit consultant in Columbus, quietly. I wanted to see whether the East Side Clinic could be spun off as its own independent organization." Claire blinked. "Independent? As in, not under the hospital board anymore?" He nodded. "And funded by an anonymous donor." Her lips parted. "Anonymous, Daniel. I didn't tell you because I didn't know if it would work," he said. "And I didn't want to give you false hope, but I've been running numbers with them. If we tighten operational costs and secure matching grants for the first 2 years, the clinic could run on its own." He exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It won't be easy, and it won't be fast, but it's possible." Claire felt the breath leave her body. "You were trying to save it," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I was trying," he said softly, "and failing, until you shoved my blind spots in my face." She laughed just once, a soft, astonished sound. He watched her, eyes searching. For the first time since the whole war over the clinic began, her voice gentled. "Maybe," Claire said slowly, "you're not the villain I decided you were." He gave a small, wry smile. "I'm still trying not to be." They stood to leave at the same time. Papers rustled, chairs scraped. The silence between them felt different now, lighter, stretched thin with unspoken things but no longer sharp. As they turned toward the door, Claire's hand brushed against his. Just lightly, barely there, but neither of them pulled away. Not immediately. The contact lingered, warm, trembling, uncertain before the moment finally broke, leaving a soft pulse of possibility in its wake. The email hit inboxes at 7:12 a.m. Claire saw it only because she was early, almost always early, and because someone had forwarded it to the general staff list instead of keeping it in whatever shadowy corner it had originated from. Subject: for your information, internal concerns. Anonymous tip: ethics violation investigation needed. The body was short, cruel, a handful of sentences, but each one was designed with surgical precision. Staff have expressed concern that Claire Whitman is leveraging an inappropriate relationship with CEO Daniel Hayes to protect her position and advance personal projects. Multiple late-night meetings behind closed doors have been observed. She has been seen leaving the building with him after hours and accompanying him on private drives to clinic visits. We deserve transparency. No signature, no proof, just poison. Claire stared at the screen, breath frozen in her chest. Her coffee cooled on the desk untouched. At first, she felt nothing. Then heat flooded her cheeks, shame, humiliation, anger, all tangled together so tightly she couldn't separate them. She pushed back from her desk, stood, and walked toward the clinic hallway. She needed to see people she trusted, people who knew her, people who... A nurse she'd known for 10 years looked up, startled. "Morning, Claire," she said, but her eyes flicked away almost instantly, unable or unwilling to hold Claire's gaze. Claire's throat tightened. She kept walking. Two techs whispering by the elevator stopped talking the moment she approached. One of them offered a strained smile, the other pretended to check his phone. Someone else looked at her, then leaned in to whisper to a colleague. The humiliation pressed against Claire's ribs like a physical weight. She wasn't naive. She knew hospital gossip could spread like wildfire. But this was different. This wasn't petty. This was personal, strategic, and she had a sick feeling she knew why. By noon, an emergency executive session had been called. Daniel didn't tell her. Someone from administration did, in a shaky whisper, like delivering bad news to a family in a waiting room. Claire didn't go. She wasn't invited, but she knew exactly what they were discussing behind that closed boardroom door. Conduct, favoritism, liability. Words that could strip away both their reputations in under an hour. She paced her small office, unable to sit. Every few minutes, she checked the hallway, waiting for something. A message, a sign, a miracle. When Daniel finally arrived, he looked like someone who'd been dragged across broken glass. His tie was askew, hair slightly out of place, something she'd never seen on him. His breathing was shallow, like each word was costing him. "Claire," he said quietly, "I'm handling it." She crossed her arms, holding herself together. "Handling it how?" "I told them the rumors were false, that your work is above reproach, that any decisions made about the clinic were mine alone." His jaw tightened. "I told them to leave you out of it." Claire stiffened. "Leave me out of it," she repeated, voice brittle. "Daniel, they didn't make this about me. Someone aimed it at me because of you." He shook his head. "Let me take care of it. Just lie low for a few days. Don't respond. Don't go to meetings you don't have to. I'll deal with everything." Her stomach churned, a slow burn rising beneath her ribs. "Lie low?" she echoed. "It's the best way to control the fallout." "Control?" Her voice rose quiet, sharp, dangerous. "You're not my shield, and I'm not your scandal to manage." Daniel flinched. He didn't step back, but something in him recoiled. "I'm trying to protect you," he said, softer now. "By erasing me?" she shot back. "By treating me like a problem? A liability?" His silence gave her the answer she feared. She brushed past him, heart pounding in her throat. She needed space, air, answers, and she got them sooner than expected. She discovered the source of the rumor before the end of the day. Calvin Ross, one of the most powerful and longest-serving board members, was in his usual spot, the administrative suite's corner office, blinds half closed, coat draped neatly on the rack behind him. Claire walked in. She didn't bother knocking. Calvin looked up, surprised, then offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Claire," he drawled, Busy day, I hear. She stepped closer. It was you. Was me what? The email blast, the rumor, the accusation. He didn't even bother pretending for long. I simply raised concerns, he said, shrugging lightly. Relationships between subordinates and executives can expose the hospital to complications. Nothing happened, Claire said sharply. Not the way you're implying. Calvin chuckled a slow, cold sound. It doesn't really matter whether it's true, Miss Whitman. Perception shapes outcomes. He leaned back, lacing his fingers over his stomach. And right now, the board is very concerned about Daniel's decision-making. This situation only underscores the need for stronger leadership. Claire froze. Her stomach dropped. This is about replacing him, she whispered. Calvin tilted his head. It's about merging with Pine Ridge Health Systems, a for-profit chain with the infrastructure to swallow our debt. Daniel refuses to consider it. He's stubborn, idealistic, becoming a liability. Then he smiled again, thin and icy. Unless, of course, he cooperates. Makes the clinic closure fast and clean. No more town halls. No more distractions. Then maybe the rumor dies quietly. Claire felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. You're blackmailing him, she breathed. It's not blackmail, Calvin corrected. It's persuasion. She walked out before she did something she couldn't undo. She found Daniel alone in the boardroom. The chairs were pushed back, papers scattered across the table. He looked up when she entered, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I talked to Calvin, she said. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Claire? No, she cut him off, voice shaky but firm. I won't be part of this. Not the politics, not the rumors, not the leverage. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her ID badge. Daniel's expression crumpled subtly, but unmistakably. Don't, he whispered. I'm resigning from the communication lead, she said. Effective now. His eyes widened, panic flickering through them. Claire, you can't. We need you. I need. She shook her head. I won't be used for numbers. I won't be used for rumors. And if you're going to save this place, Daniel. Her voice broke, but only for a second. You'll have to do it without hiding behind me. She set the badge on the table between them. It landed with a small, unforgiving click. Then she turned and walked out, leaving Daniel standing in the middle of the room, the weight of Calvin's threat settling over him like a storm he couldn't outrun. The boardroom at Riverside Regional had never felt so cold. Not winter cold, the vents were humming, the heat steady. This was the kind of cold that lived in polished mahogany tables, in the tight smiles of people who had already made up their minds before the meeting even began. Daniel stood at the head of the table, tie neatly knotted, hair combed back, posture rigid. Only Claire, watching through the glass from the hallway, would have noticed the faint tremor in his hand as he clicked the projector remote. The agenda on the screen was brutal in its simplicity. Item 1. Vote. Sale of Eastside Clinic property. Proposed buyer. Pine Ridge Health Systems. For profit. Calvin Ross sat halfway down the table, arms folded, expression smugly neutral. He nodded at Daniel with a little flick of his fingers, as if prompting a trained performer to begin the show. Daniel inhaled slowly. Then he clicked to the first slide. Charts. Margins. Projected savings. The usual. The board leaned in, satisfied. He was doing exactly what Calvin expected, presenting the closure as a done deal, tying a bow around months of pressure. Claire watched from outside, hidden, heart hammering. Every number felt like a nail in the coffin of the community she loved. Daniel cleared his throat. We project a 14% reduction in operating deficits with the sale, he said, and Pine Ridge guarantees a streamlined integration. He stopped. Mid-sentence. Mid-slide. Claire frowned. Something in the room shifted. Daniel's shoulders squared, but his hands, they weren't trembling anymore. He closed the laptop. The projector screen went dark. The entire board blinked at him. Calvin's brow furrowed. Daniel? Is there a problem with the file? Daniel looked up, eyes scanning the faces around the table. When he spoke, his voice was low but unwavering. There's a problem, he said, but it's not the file. A silence fell so deep it felt like pressure in the ears. I've let fear drive my decisions for months, Daniel continued. Fear of numbers. Fear of debt. Fear of disappointing this board. Fear of failing my father's legacy. Nobody breathed. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what a hospital is for. Someone shifted. A pen clicked nervously. Calvin's jaw tensed. Riverside has never been just a business, Daniel said. It's a promise, and this board has pushed me to betray that promise. Calvin sat forward. Daniel cut him off without raising his voice. Calvin Ross, he said evenly, has been negotiating with Pine Ridge behind the board's back for months. Gasps rippled through the room. Claire pressed a hand to the glass. He intends to use the closure, Daniel continued, to force a merger that would gut patient services, replace staff with contractors, and turn Riverside into a revenue engine. Calvin stood abruptly. This is outrageous. I have emails, Daniel said. Recordings, meeting minutes from Pine Ridge executives referencing Calvin directly. Calvin's face went red. This is slander. Sit down, another board member murmured. Daniel waited until Calvin slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Now, he said quietly, I'll explain what happens next. He pulled a small folder from his briefcase and laid it on the table. I've drafted paperwork to purchase the East Side Clinic building myself, through the Hayes Family Trust. The room erupted. You can't. That's a conflict of... Is this legal? Daniel raised a hand. The trust will immediately transfer ownership into a new nonprofit foundation, independent of this hospital, protected from board interference, sustainable, grant-eligible, and dedicated solely to serving the East Side. Hands slammed on the table, voices rose. But Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Everything I failed to do as CEO, he said, I will do as a private citizen. And then, the door at the back of the room clicked open. Claire stepped inside. Someone had texted her. She didn't know who. She didn't care. All eyes turned to her. She saw the flicker in Daniel's expression, fear, relief, regret, before he masked it again. He faced the board. And one more thing, he said. Any suggestion that Miss Whitman used an inappropriate relationship for influence, any whisper, any rumor, is a lie. Her breath caught. If disciplinary action is needed, Daniel said, voice unwavering, it should be taken against me, not her. The silence was seismic. Calvin pounced. Then I move, he said sharply, that we remove Daniel Hayes as CEO, effective immediately. The words sliced through the room. But before Calvin could gloat, someone else spoke. A woman in her 70s, Elaine Porter, the longest-serving board member, cleared her throat. Before we vote on that, she said, I want to say something. She turned toward Daniel. I've watched you struggle against impossible numbers and impossible expectations. But what you did today, her voice wavered. Your father would be proud, Calvin scoffed. Elaine, she lifted a hand. He went silent. We will vote, she said, but not on Pine Ridge. She gestured to Daniel's folder. We'll vote on selling the clinic building to the nonprofit foundation. A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel's eyes widened, not in triumph but in disbelief. Elaine continued, firm. And after that, we'll vote on accepting Mr. Hayes's resignation. Claire felt her knees weaken. Not fired, not disgraced. Resigned by his own choice. To save the clinic. To save her. The votes came one by one. First vote, sell the building to the nonprofit. A majority raised their hands. Calvin's face drained of color. Second vote, accept Daniel's resignation. Again, a majority. Daniel's title slipped away, but so did Calvin's control. The meeting adjourned in stunned silence. Claire stood by the doorway as board members filtered out, some touching Daniel's shoulder, some avoiding his eyes. Daniel remained seated, hands folded, staring at the table where his laptop had been. He had lost everything the board valued, but he had saved the one thing that mattered. And Claire felt the weight of that sacrifice like a hand closing gently but irrevocably around her heart. Winter had settled deep over Riverside, the kind of winter that dulled sound and slowed breath. Snowbanks lined the sidewalks like pale shoulders, shoveled and reshoveled but never truly gone. The air held that quiet bite that made every exhale visible, a reminder of how fragile warmth could be. 3 months had passed. Claire stood outside the old clinic building, watching as the last rays of late afternoon sunlight glazed the windows. A new sign hung over the entrance, crisp and clean against the aging brick. Riverside Community Health Center, a Hayes Whitman Foundation project. Every time she saw it, something inside her tightened, not painful, just full. The place was alive again. Not perfect, not polished, but alive. She pushed the door open, stepping into the familiar scent of disinfectant and old wood, mixed now with fresh paint. The kids' waiting room had been restored exactly as it once had been, the same mural of cartoon animals marching across a bright meadow, their colors revived but faithful to the original. Claire had asked the contractor how the idea came up. He'd shrugged, said, "Some tall guy with gray at his temples insisted we keep it," said, "The kids looked for it." She'd pretended not to know who he meant. Her days were long, longer than she'd expected. As executive director of the nonprofit, she was juggling grant applications, budgets, staff shortages, winter flu season, and the endless emotional weight of running a clinic that served people with nowhere else to go. But she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. A kind of aliveness that hummed beneath her exhaustion. Still, there was an absence she couldn't shake. She hadn't heard from Daniel, not once since the day he left the boardroom carrying a cardboard box and a career he'd chosen to set down. She checked email compulsively for months. Nothing. But there were signs, quiet ones. A donation envelope with no return address. Then 3 more. A new diagnostic cart delivered anonymously. A check from a private benefactor covering the entire cost of the mobile outreach van she'd barely dared to dream of. She'd asked around. No one admitted a thing. But sometimes, when she walked through the building alone, she could feel it, his presence, like fingerprints on a memory. It was nearly 7 on a Tuesday evening when she finally shut down her computer, the clinic emptied, the last patient gone. She wrapped her scarf twice around her neck, fingers stiff from the cold that seeped through old window frames. The front doors creaked as she locked them. When she turned, her breath caught. Across the street, half in shadow beneath a street lamp, stood Daniel. Hands in his coat pockets, shoulders relaxed, snow clinging softly to his hair and the collar of his coat. Watching the building. Watching her. She didn't move at first. Neither did he. It felt like seeing a ghost, only ghosts didn't look this real. Slowly, he crossed the street. He stopped at the bottom of the clinic steps, looking up at her with a small, almost shy smile. She hadn't seen that expression in a very long time. "Hi, Claire," he said. Just her name. Soft, warm. She swallowed. "You look different." "Healthier?" he offered, one brow lifting. "Yes," she admitted. "Well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Turns out sleeping 8 hours a night isn't optional." "Who knew?" She almost laughed and almost cried. He stepped up one stair, then another, leaving just enough distance for her to retreat if she wanted to. She didn't. "I've been doing some consulting," he said, "part-time. Rural hospital networks mostly, helping them avoid the mistakes I made." His voice softened. "And I'm actually taking care of myself now. Cardio rehab, stress management, the whole midlife restoration package." She nodded, trying to steady the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "That's good," she said quietly. "Really good." He glanced at the sign above them. "You made this place beautiful." "We made it," she corrected before she could think. His eyes flicked to hers, uncertain, hopeful. She went on. "Patients keep saying they thought we'd forgotten them, that the town had given up on them. But this," she gestured around, "this building tells them otherwise." Daniel exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding the breath for months. They stood together on the steps, the cold sinking around them, but the moment warm, strangely warm. Finally, he spoke. "Claire, I owe you an apology." She looked at him, eyebrows lifting. He shook his head gently. "Not for the kiss. I'll never apologize for that." Her pulse skipped. "But for everything before it," he continued. "For the meetings where I let you stand alone. For the nights the board used you as a shield and I didn't stop it. For how many times I leaned on your voice because I was too afraid to use my own." His voice tightened. "I'm sorry for letting fear make a coward out of me." The wind stirred, brushing snow across the sidewalk in soft spirals. Claire let the words settle between them. She could hear the sincerity raw, unvarnished, the kind he'd never offered anyone when he wore a title. "You didn't just save a building, Daniel," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "You gave these folks a reason to believe again." She hesitated, then added, softly, "including me." Something flickered across his face, relief, gratitude, maybe something deeper, but neither of them spoke next. The silence stretched, not empty, not tense. A silence like the first clear night after a long storm. But before either of them could take a step closer to whatever this was becoming, Claire felt a surge of emotion rise in her chest, urgent and unfinished. She looked at him, breath clouding in the cold. "Daniel, there's something I need to ask you." And the words trembled on her lips, unspoken, hanging in the winter air between them. Snow drifted softly against the clinic windows, settling like powdered sugar along the sill. Evening light had begun its slow fade, turning the river beyond the parking lot into a sheet of muted silver. The building hummed lightly, the low buzz of the furnace, the faint clicking of cooling radiators, the distant laughter of a child waiting for a ride home. Claire stood beside Daniel in the doorway, keys dangling from her fingers. "I figure," she said quietly, "you should see what your sacrifice actually built." He gave a faint smile. "Lead the way." They walked the halls slowly. Daniel's hand brushed the old wooden banister at the stairwell, the same banister he had once dismissed as outdated infrastructure. Now he touched it like something precious, fingers moving over the grooves worn by decades of hands. He paused at the kids' waiting room, smiling softly at the bright green meadow stretching across the mural. "Looks just like it used to," he murmured. "That was intentional," Claire said. "Familiarity heals more than people think." A toddler toddled past them in a puffy blue winter coat, giggling as her mother scrambled after her. The sound was bright, small, real. Daniel watched them with an expression Claire couldn't quite read, something between longing and gratitude. They moved on. Claire showed him the refurbished exam rooms, the new diagnostic cart, the outreach map on the wall littered with pins marking mobile clinic stops. Every step felt strange, intimate, like showing someone the pages of a diary. At last, they stopped by the tall window overlooking the river. Snowflakes chased each other in loose spirals, dissolving against the glass. They stood quietly. "Funny," Claire murmured, "how we ended up here." Daniel huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. "Feels like a lifetime." She looked at his reflection in the glass, older than when he arrived in Riverside. A little more gray, fewer sharp edges. "You know," she said softly, "that kiss on the roof, it didn't fix anything." His jaw tensed. "I know. It didn't solve the clinic closure. It didn't stop the rumors. It didn't save your job. And it didn't suddenly turn us into better people." He turned toward her then, fully. "No," he agreed. "It didn't." She breathed in, slow and steady. What changed things wasn't the kiss, it was everything that came after. He waited, eyes steady on hers. "It was the choices you made," she said. "The way you stopped hiding behind spreadsheets, the way you learned to look people in the eye again, the way you," she swallowed, "walked away from power when it was killing the part of you that cared." Daniel's voice dropped. "And you," he said, "you kept showing up even when everything in you wanted to run. You fought for people who had no fight left. You stood up to me, the board, the whole damn system." A silence fell, soft, warm, necessary. Daniel looked down at his hands, flexing them as if testing their strength. "I'm still figuring things out," he admitted. "How to live like a man whose worth isn't tied to quarterly reports. How to be someone who doesn't choose work over everything." His eyes lifted to hers, vulnerable and earnest. Claire's breath hitched. "I guess," she said gently, "I'm still learning too. How to love someone without giving up the parts of myself I almost lost taking care of everyone else." His face softened, truly softened for the first time since she'd met him. He took a step closer. Not rushed, not impulsive, not desperate like that night on the roof. Careful, deliberate. A choice. "Claire," he whispered. She didn't move away. His hand came up slowly, hovering near her cheek, waiting for permission. She leaned into it, just enough for him to feel her answer. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like the storm-soaked collision months earlier. This was different. Soft. Intentional. Steady as falling snow. A kiss that didn't need to fix anything. A kiss that simply meant everything. They stood like that for a long, quiet moment. The clinic humming gently around them, the world outside muted by winter. When they finally pulled apart, Claire rested her forehead against his. "Looks like we're here," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, voice thick. "Together, this time." They didn't speak again as she walked him through the last darkened hallway, turning off lights one by one. The building settled into evening, the glow of the new sign illuminating the snow-covered lot. Riverside Community Health Center. A Hayes Whitman Foundation project. It felt like a benediction, Outside, the winter night wrapped around them, not harsh, but crisp, full of possibility. They stepped into it side by side, their footprints weaving a twin path across the untouched snow. And somewhere in the distance, the river kept moving quiet, steady, unafraid of the cold. Years later, Claire would tell the story in her own words. My boss drove me crazy. He pushed every button I had. But the night he kissed me, on that cold roof, something cracked open in both of us. Not a fairy tale, not a miracle cure. Just two tired hearts, finally brave enough to stop hiding. And a town that refused to be treated like a number. She would smile, remembering. Turns out, the kiss didn't fix everything, but it meant everything. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it. Not in the moments that feel triumphant or certain, but in the small places where two tired people finally stop pretending they're made of steel. Claire and Daniel didn't save each other with grand gestures. Their lives didn't change because of a kiss on a cold rooftop. What changed everything were the quiet choices that followed the courage to tell the truth, the willingness to lose power for the sake of what's right, the bravery to be seen, flaws and all. Life rarely gives us perfect timing, but it does give us people who hold up a mirror, showing us who we could become if we let go of fear for just one moment. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can offer each other is simply this: a reason to believe again in ourselves, in kindness, and in the possibility of beginning anew. Thank you for spending this time with us, for listening, for feeling, for remembering that every story carries a piece of our shared humanity. If this tale touched something in you, a memory, a hope, a quiet ache you haven't named in years, please know that your presence here matters more than you think. On this channel, we believe in kindness, in dignity, and in stories that help us breathe a little softer at the end of the day. Thank you for being here with us. Every like, share, and subscribe helps us tell more stories that touch the soul. Stories that remind the world there is still light in ordinary lives. We're grateful for you, always.